The views expressed by our guests are their own and do not reflect the official stance of their employer or any affiliated organizations. Welcome back to the Counsel House Podcast. I'm your co-host, Daniel Abramoff. Today we have another great guest, Sujit Raman, the Chief Legal Officer at TRM Labs. TRM Labs is a blockchain intelligence platform that is made to monitor and investigate and detect financial crime and digital assets. Sujit, thank you so much for joining us today.
Daniel, it's great to be here.
So when people hear crypto compliance, they often think of a pretty niche issue, but you describe digital assets as sitting at the intersection of technology, finance, and geopolitics. From where you're sitting, how significant of a national security and global financial stability issue is this really?
Well, what I would say, Daniel, is that over the past few years, we've seen a tremendous expansion in the adoption of digital assets. So you think about a few years ago, most people thought of crypto as kind of a niche thing, kind of a oddity. And now that we're seeing becoming increasingly a central part of the global economy, still small, but growing at a tremendous rate. And that's across all sectors, whether it's individual retail use. We're seeing folks all around the world, including outside of the developing world, right? That's often where you see a lot of the greatest adoption in economies where there isn't as much stability, where there's a lot of inflation. People look to crypto for stability, ironically, because that's where you have less volatility or less variability. But even among established governments around the world, you're seeing regulatory structures come into place. Here in the United States, the Genius Act was passed last year, which created a structure for issuing stablecoins. As you and I are speaking right now, there's a debate on the Hill about the Clarity Act and setting up a regulatory structure for digital assets within the American economy. You've got regulatory structures in the Middle East, in Dubai, in Singapore, in the UK, in Europe. So this technology is here to stay. And increasingly we're seeing not only individuals, but also large financial institutions, governments, as I said, thinking about whether it's central bank digital currencies or other types of central currencies. These are the developments that we're seeing in the global financial system. And as I said, those trends are here to stay. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see how the technology evolves over time.
And so speaking on that, right, the evolution of technology as well as the evolution of investigations. 10 years ago, financial crime investigations largely centered around banks, right? And today, blockchain intelligence firms, they're tracing activity across decentralized networks. So how fundamentally has that changed investigations?
It's changed a lot. And I would analogize it to the early days of digital evidence, right? When I started out, pretty much every investigation I did as a prosecutor started off with paper. You would get literally, bankers' boxes worth of papers that you had to go through in response to subpoenas to figure out exactly where the money went or what happened. Pretty early in my career in the government, you started seeing, servers, right? Data being stored on servers. So then you had to search electronic containers. So you started seeing the evolution from paper to digital. I think we're going to see a very similar evolution when it comes to financial crime investigations. And frankly, we're seeing it already, right? When your typical investigator, typical federal agent, typical police officer back in the day had to know how to seize documents, then they had to learn how to seize electronic records. Now, when it comes to financial investigations, they're going to have to learn how crypto works because there are so many positive uses of digital assets, and we can talk about that as we go forward. I mean, it truly is a revolutionary financial technology. But above and beyond that, bad actors are often at the very leading edge of trying to figure out how they can manipulate emerging technology for their own ends. And so for law enforcement and for governments and for public safety officials to stay even or to stay ahead, they're going to have to also understand what the malign actors are up to. And the bad actors are certainly trying to leverage technology, all technologies, including digital assets, to do what they want to do.
Mm-hmm. And so there's a common narrative, right, that crypto enables crime because of the anonymous factor of that, right? But blockchain is permanently transparent, right? So is digital asset activity actually becoming easier to track than traditional financial crimes?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting dynamic that you've just described, Daniel, because I think a lot of people don't realize that. They think of crypto as being totally anonymous. And it's actually the opposite. As you mentioned, every cryptocurrency sits on a blockchain, and every blockchain essentially is permanently encoded with various information. So you can look at transactions that occurred on the Bitcoin blockchain in 2017. Now, you can't do that in the ordinary financial system, right? There might be some bank record somewhere, but it's in someone's private, documents. Whereas the blockchains are open, they're transparent, they're auditable. So you can really get a sense of how financial transactions have moved over time. And using the right technology, you can figure out who's behind those transactions while still respecting privacy and respecting civil liberties. So I think the way that blockchains work have fundamentally transformed how investigations work. And as malign actors move increasingly into digital assets, it's important for investigative firms, for investigators themselves, to be able to understand how to trace funds across different blockchains. And not just on one blockchain, not just Bitcoin or Ethereum or Solana or whatever, but bad actors, as well as legitimate actors, move crypto across blockchains. And that's where the technology really comes in. So I think the investigative landscape has completely transformed over the last few years. And it's very important for governments, for private sector, financial institutions that are interested in compliance, want to make sure that they're not receiving money from money laundering organizations or the North Koreans or sanctioned parties. They've all got to be in front of that so that they don't become part of the cycle of moving illicit money around, and instead creating a safer financial system for everyone.
Right. And all the more need to have firms that are on top of that and can make sure that they're doing the right due diligence to make sure that that never happens, which is very interesting. So when regulators and investigators first see blockchain analytics in action, what surprises them the most?
I think, what's really shocking for a lot of people when they first see this technology is the backwards and the forwards nature of it. So often investigators are trained to follow the money, but when you actually see a graph, it's actually beautiful. I mean, you actually see how the money kind of spreads out over time. You see how actors use different wallets to, mix in or mix out, or they use different kind of laundering techniques to go from one point to another. When you map that out, it actually becomes this beautiful diagram. And when you see it, it's like watching, a tree grow or watching cells divide. The first time that you're in science class and you see like how life actually exists. For me, the first time I saw one of these tracing charts, it was a very similar thing. You'd spent your whole career investigating crime, trying to figure out how bad actors try to manipulate or leverage loopholes or gaps. And when you actually see it laid out like that, it's eye-opening. And as I was saying, what's really eye-opening is the fact that you can trace money forward and you can trace it backward. And that way you can create you can map the infrastructure of an entire illicit ecosystem in ways that, traditionally took months, if not years, to try to figure it all out. So I think for investigators, that's the kind of eye-opening, light bulb moment. You see one of these charts and you recognize, oh my gosh, there's so much I can do here that I could never do before.
And it sounds like before it would have been quite a frustrating task, right? Obviously, what you just said, it takes years sometimes to do this. And then you have almost like a painting with missing pieces, whereas this just has everything included based on the fact that it's all being tracked on the blockchain.
And not only does it have everything included, but it's also all real time. So you think about, a traditional pin chart or some other chart that you've created as an investigator, that is valid for the moment that you made it. And it depends on the records until March 1st or June 1st or September 1st. There's no way to update it except to manually get more records or keep that process going. The beauty of the blockchain is that if you're using the right tooling and you're using the right mapping functioning, you can have a real-time sense of how things are evolving over time. So it's right there on your screen. It's on your dashboard. And that gives you, investigative insights that previously were unimagined.
That is so fascinating. So AI arms race, right? There's a growing concern that bad actors may be adopting AI faster than corporations and regulators. Are we entering an environment where criminals are becoming more sophisticated faster than the defenders?
Well, the short answer is yes. I think we're already seeing AI being leveraged by bad actors for all sorts of things, right? Ordinary criminals are using AI because the things that before you needed some specialized knowledge to do, now you can find it pretty easily, using certain AI tools. When it comes to deepfakes or other kinds of manipulation of media, obviously AI makes that much easier than you could do before. And so we're already seeing, Daniel, as you probably know, just a massive growth in AI-enabled fraud, AI-enabled crime. Think about the phishing emails that you probably get every single day, everyone who's watching. It used to be pretty obvious grammatical errors, misspellings. Whereas now you've got to be much more careful. The ability for bad actors to create phishing emails, which is still the traditional way of trying to compromise your credentials, is so much easier and so much harder to detect. And so to your question, I think it's extremely important for people on the Guardian side, right, to enable, to adopt, and to be at the forefront of using artificial intelligence in the right way to confront this behavior, identify it, and disrupt it. So if, the good guys, so to speak, are not leveraging AI, that they're not doing their jobs, because that the malign actors are, and they're imposing huge costs on Americans, on just innocent people all around the world. So that's something that at my company and at other companies as well, we're really focused on trying to leverage these incredible technologies, these new technologies, these emerging technologies, to identify this behavior, confront it, and disrupt it.
So legal departments are naturally risk focused, right? But AI is moving at such a pace where hesitation can become a risk on its own. How do legal leaders like yourself balance responsible caution with avoiding paralysis?
Yeah. I mean, it's a very good question. And I think it's something that we're at a very important moment right now. And everyone feels like they live in an important moment. I would say this moment is particularly significant when it comes to technology, when it comes to public safety, the factors that we've just talked about, right? The threats to our everyday ecosystem, whether it's cyber threats, whether it's money laundering, whether it's sextortion, whether it's manipulation of media. These are all things that are accelerating at an incredible rate. And if you're at a company, and I'm very lucky to be at a company that's at the forefront of trying to confront those threats, you have to leverage the technology to address it. But you've got to do it in a careful, thoughtful, measured way, right? And so you're absolutely right. I mean, lawyers are obviously trained to think about risk. Lawyers are trained to think about how can I minimize exposure. But you also, I think the very best ones recognize that you have to empower your team. And so something that I've tried to do and something our leadership at my company have tried to do, because we're an AI native company, right, is be forward-leaning on adopting these tools, understanding exactly how they work, leveraging the language models and taking what we can out of them, while also being very thoughtful about data security, data protection. We vet very rigorously any AI tool that we have at the company. And that's something that my team is responsible for, along with our security team. Those are rules and frameworks that we built up front, I'd say a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, long before most companies were thinking about this whole AI pivot. And I think that's been to our benefit. But it's also something you have to think very carefully about, because there's new tools every single day. You've got people on your team who want to leverage these new tools. You've got engineers at the company who are by nature trying to push the envelope because that's what they're paid to do. You want to empower that, but you also want to make sure that you're not exposing yourself to risk. So it's not an easy thing to balance. But I think if you fall into inaction, if you're just too scared of it all and so say no to everything, you're going to find yourself, not only out of business because your competitors will take over, but also you're not doing your job, right? As a legal leader, your job is to make sure that your team and the entire company is traveling at the pace of innovation.
When you look at legal departments, I think there is across the board usually a level of interest towards bringing on these new solutions. Just like you said, everyone wants their technology that's going to help their team advance more. And sometimes the tech is just not as good as the other tech. But in your situation, obviously, it is really a much more of a risky situation because you are helping your clients with these technologies. It's internally, but it's also externally.
That's right. Yeah, and there's a really interesting dynamic there. I like to see, the really positive side of that, which is I'm so lucky to be surrounded by some of the world's best engineers, right? So they're building products for our customers, for our clients, and yet I get to tap into that expertise to help build tooling for my own team. And so we really leverage that. We have a wonderful AI automation team. We have a wonderful AI engineering team. We've got the world's best engineers because they're at the cutting edge of data analytics, of statistical analysis, of blockchain, intelligence. And so we try to be thoughtful about how much time of theirs that we use. But that has been a real kind of synergistic opportunity for us as a legal team to leverage the expertise of the engineers that we have in-house and build better tools for ourselves.
So some people out there believe that AI will automate highly sophisticated fraud, phishing campaigns, synthetic identities. and money laundering schemes. But others believe AI will dramatically improve detection and compliance. So which side do you think will win?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. I mean, as we talked about earlier, clearly the bad actors are already leveraging AI. And you can see it in terms of, look at the FBI's victim impact reports. Cyber crime, even though people have been attacking this problem for over a decade now, the numbers go up every single year. So, it's clear that the bad actors are in some ways winning the long war of attrition. But that's why it's so much more important for people on the good side, right? The defense side also kind of leverage up. So I think it's pretty clear that bad actors are moving forward very aggressively. And I think it's going to be very important for people on the defense side to match. I don't think we're there yet. I think, certainly governments have to be a little bit more thoughtful without compromising, again, on due process issues or, law, respecting the rule of law, right? You have to make sure that you're respecting civil liberties. Privacy is very, very important for all, free societies. And yet we have to be able to leverage the large data analytics that are out there in a way that actually promotes public safety. Again, without sacrificing any of the principles that make our society as great as it is, we have to understand that technology is being leveraged by malign actors. And so we need to make sure that we're doing the same on the other side.
And so, going back a little bit to building a legal team, right? If you were building a legal team from scratch today, knowing where AI is heading, how would you structure the team differently?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's one I've been thinking about a lot. And I think most legal leaders at this moment are having that discussion. I think traditionally the way a legal team is set up is you've got a general counsel or a chief legal officer at the top, you've got deputies below them, then you've got maybe some assistant general counsels, and then various subject matter experts. It's a kind of a pyramidal system. I think that system in the long term will be completely obsolete. I think what we're really going to start seeing, at least in-house, right, at big companies or even small companies, somebody at the top, general counsel type person, and then you're going to have a lot of subject matter experts, okay? And with those subject matter experts, they're going to have not only the ability, but the requirement to create agents below them, right? Code-based bots that essentially do a lot of the automable work. So you'll have an expert in commercial, maybe 2 or 3 lawyers, but people who are, subject matter experts. You think of them as junior partners at a law firm, people who can really pick up and run with a tasking. And they'll have a bunch of bots below them that do the NDAs, that do the vendor agreements, that do the reseller agreements, the data partnership agreements, stuff that is relatively routinized will go through the bots. And the job of that SME, the subject matter expert, is to program those bots based on their experience and their judgment. You'll have somebody in privacy. You'll have somebody on product. You'll have somebody on tax, right? Commercial, corporate. So it's a much flatter system as I see it evolving over time. And again, the larger the company, the more complex the issues, you'll have more bodies, but it's going to be much, much, much smaller than what we see in so many legal departments today, where you read about, 700, 800, or 1,000 lawyers at a company in-house. I think those days are, maybe not yet behind us, but give it 5-10 years, I think that'll be very much the exception.
That is so interesting because, the whole world is feeling a little threatened by AI for those who don't really understand it. For those who understand it, they know that this is a great opportunity for them to learn new skills and offer new value. To your point, there's a ton of attorneys in some of these large legal departments. And so it makes you think that maybe the quality of what an attorney will go up while the industry of who is supporting these attorneys will expand massively. So I think that while it might be a frustration in the beginning, there's going to be a lot more opportunity out there for everyone, it sounds like. So outside counsel expectations, how do you think AI changes the relationship between in-house teams and outside counsel? Will companies start expecting outside firms to deliver faster and differently?
They will, and I think they'll also expect a couple things. As I mentioned, I think in-house leaders, or at least the most effective ones, will expect more from their in-house teams. And I don't mean that just in terms of like hours or sweat or, blood and tears. It's more just leveraging the technology that's out there. So, the expectation of your in-house team will be run the first draft through ChatGPT or Claude or whatever. You shouldn't be spending time drafting memos. You should be running that through the AI and then using your human judgment to make sure that it's accurate. All of that processing should happen in-house, as opposed to, traditionally where that would probably go to an outside law firm. So I think a lot of work is going to stay in-house that otherwise traditionally would have been sent outside to law firms. Now, when it comes to law firms, I think the expectation among general counsels is going to be, show me the value. Explain to me that you're using these tools and that you're actually being more efficient, that you're saving me money, right? And you're doing it, and when you are using these tools, that you're protecting the data, that you're not, leaking it out anywhere. So I think we're going to see in-house greater focus on in-house efficiency, and on the stuff that goes to outside counsel, really wanting to make sure that these tools are being leveraged. Now, we're seeing, as you know, Daniel, like within the broader legal industry, we're already starting to see, the top 20, top 25, top 30 law firms kind of separating themselves from the pack in terms of profitability, in terms of profits per partner. You look at the billing rates, which are, astounding, candidly, compared to when I was in private practice just a few years ago. At some level, that dynamic is going to shift.
Right.
And it's either these top law firms are going to continue breaking away and yet still have to make the case for how AI is keeping them efficient versus everybody else. And I think that's where the real disruption is going to come in the legal industry. And I think it's going to happen sooner than people really, really recognize. I have a lot of friends who are partners at law firms who still don't quite see it. Mm-hmm. And I tell them, let me tell you what's happening within my own company and my own legal team. The people who I work with, they didn't go to law school as computer scientists or coders or whatnot, but they're already adopting this stuff and they love it. They see the efficiency. So if you, my friend, as an outside law firm, person, don't recognize the tsunami that's coming your way, it's going to hit you before you realize it.
Right. And I think that for all the partners who are delaying and pushing this off, to your point, it's only going to make more of a hesitance over time and a problem for them, while the client, like yourself, is already looking at firms that are going to not only appreciate using these solutions, but get good results much quicker. So what parts of legal work do you think AI meaningfully kind of changes first? Research, investigations, document review, compliance monitoring, or something else?
Yeah, it's a little bit what we were talking about earlier. This is something I've actually thought a lot about. And I think if you're a responsible leader in the legal industry right now, you have to think carefully about, what can I most easily automate?
Right.
Because that is what is most easily subject to AI, efficiencies. So within my own team, a lot of our contracting, we've adopted a number of tools. And I give credit to the folks on my team who've really, developed in-house a lot of these toolings. It's you get the red lines in from your contracts, you create your own playbook and you code it into the AI. And so what used to take, probably a couple hours to review now takes maybe 5 minutes. It's astounding to see that kind of efficiency. And so that's where, if I'm building from scratch as a legal leader and trying to adopt AI, I take it one step at a time. I map my function and I figure out where is things most easily automated. And that's where I focus my attention. The other thing, and I think tone really matters. This is something I've written about, coming in with the, if you don't adopt it, you're going to get terminated approach. For people who, again, went to law school, right? They didn't become computer programmers or coders for a reason, or mathematicians. You've got to help empower them, but also make it clear to them that I'm trying to do you a favor, right? 3 to 5 years from now, if you don't have these skills, then you are going to be in a very tough position professionally. So I want to get you there as your manager, as your supervisor, as your leader. I want to empower you so that in this world that's coming, you're part of the conversation rather than not. Mm-hmm. And I found with my own team, that's a very positive way to do it. And people have responded. People are inherently thoughtful, curious, interesting. Lawyers tend to be intellectually, open to a lot of issues. So I found that when you start with what you can automate and you really leverage that, you're going to see results right away.
So one concern leaders in the legal industry have is that AI systems are only as good as the information they're trained on. And how should legal departments think about protecting sensitive data while still embracing AI?
Well, it's like I said, you have to build relationships with your IT folks, with your security folks. You have to really understand the tools. I mean, you can't just kind of wholesale, incorporate something without reading the fine print. I mean, that's one thing lawyers are very good at, right, is reading the fine print. Understand. I mean, you'll have to be kind of a data protection lawyer, right? Understand where the data is being stored, who has access to it, how long is it stored, is it minimized in any way? What are the sensitivities, right? You've got to read all the fine print and figure out how these models work, how the tooling works, and then shape your behavior accordingly. What I found as time has gone on, most of the large language model companies respect that. They recognize that in the long term, for them, the far more profitable play is to create these enclaves where there is, protection, there is privacy, where they're not kind of monitoring or scooping up all the data that goes in, because they recognize that corporations and law firms and other private parties want some kind of a sandbox where they can just do their thing. And so I found that as time goes on, the market is meeting that need, and you are finding areas where you can experiment with this stuff, but do it in a way that's still protective and doesn't expose your crown jewels to any third party or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. That's very interesting. So for in-house legal and compliance teams, what are the biggest blind spots right now around AI and digital asset risk?
Well, around AI, I think it's a lot of questions around what we were saying just now. Where is the data being stored? Who has access to it? If it's being transcribed or if there's a recording somewhere, where is it? And what are the implications of that? If every single conversation of your head of HR is being recorded somewhere, that's something as a general counsel you probably want to know, and ideally have views on before it's implemented, right? Or at least build the frameworks, build the guardrails so that you can enable people to be more efficient, but also still do your job, which is to protect your client and to make sure that the laws are being respected. So I think the AI question is very important, but it's a little bit discrete from the digital assets question, which is if you're in that industry, there's so much more regulation, coming or already on the way. And I think, folks who understand those regulations are worth their weight in gold, right? Mm. There's anti-money laundering rules, there's counter-terror financing rules, there's, the Bank Secrecy Act type issues, there's custody issues, there's banking issues. Depending on where in the ecosystem you sit, that regulatory structure is very, very important to get right. There's cyber issues, people get hacked all the time and have their digital assets stolen. I mean, these are very, very serious, risks. Now, when you combine the AI and the digital assets, right, which is the kind of work that my firm does, right? We're in the business of helping create AI-enhanced investigations. It's kind of both sets of risks together. And that's why I think it takes a very special lawyer, a very special, executive to be able to be successful in this field, because you have to understand all the risks, you have to understand all the potential, downfalls, and yet still be able to create products that leverage the upside, the opportunities of both sets of technologies. And AI and crypto are coming together, in many really interesting ways. And I think the folks who can understand where that overlap is are the ones who are really going to have opportunities going forward.
Wow. You all are definitely in a very unique position to be the leaders in this area, and especially yourself leading on the AI side on your team within the legal department, and then bleeding into what your clients are facing as well on the digital asset side. I think it's incredibly interesting. So if we had this conversation 5 years from now, what changes most? How governments regulate technology, how legal departments operate, or how bad actors exploit technology?
Yeah, I mean, my kind of easy answer is all of the above. I think there's a lot of uncertainty about how governments are going to regulate technology. There's an active conversation right now about, should governments have insight into the various models? Should they regulate them? There's kind of a traditional free market approach. There's a much more kind of government-focused approach. There's options in the middle. And I think what we've seen is even within the United States, there's been shifts over time about how to think about these issues. Certainly in Europe, certainly in East Asia, in other parts of the world, very different philosophies around all of this. And so if you're a global company and you're trying to build products and you're trying to sell to customers all around the world, there's a lot of uncertainty there. and a lot of, it's not even risk. It's just people don't even know how these structures are going to play out. So I think potentially, governments and how they regulate tech could have the biggest impact, but we just don't know how that's going to play out. On the other two options that you mentioned, I think it's a little bit more controllable. Certainly there's going to be shifts in how legal departments are arranged. I've already described about how technology is already kind of impacting how most general counsels think about tech. But on the other hand, you have a lot of established companies that have a hard time pivoting very quickly. And so in 5 years, it'll probably look a lot more like what I described, but many, many companies may not be 100% there yet. And I think there is going to be that period of disruption, right? Where, companies are figuring out how to arrange themselves internally when it comes to legal or compliance or other types of issues. And they're kind of half in, half out. And honestly, that's a dangerous moment because that's when you can sort of miss things or, not have the connectivity across your enterprise that you need. I think you've got to be decisive when you sort of make that pivot once you've realized that that's the right move for you. So, I think it's one of those situations where we do have to see how things play out over the next few years. I think all of these variables and all of these factors will play out together. But it's an exciting time. And professionally, for me, probably the most excited and most just, in some ways uncertain, but also because of the uncertainty, the potential for really wide-scale transitioning and shifting into a completely new state is right in front of us. So this is the most excited I've ever been, doing the kind of work that I'm doing. It's really, really been pretty interesting to see.
That's so fascinating. And coming from your background, you're in the government prosecuting and going after financial crimes, going into the digital space of dealing with crimes. I think that you're absolutely right that nobody out there can deny the fact that these are incredibly intriguing yet risky times. But to hear your perspective on this, I think really is just very enlightening. So thank you again so much for joining us and sharing this with our audience. I think that it has been an eye-opener for those that have no idea what the blockchain is or does, but have been given a good piece of wisdom today. And for those that do know and really are still learning so much more about it from your perspective. So thank you so much for joining us.
It's really great to be here. Thanks, Daniel.